Product provided by Nintendo. Fire Emblem Warriors continues the new established trend by Nintendo and Koei Tecmo to fuse Nintendo's well-established IP with Koei Tecmo's Dynasty Warriors gameplay. While at first glance some may be quick to call this a Hyrule Warriors reskin, there is a lot of features adopted and retooled from the core Fire Emblem series that makes this game feel a bit more unique compared to Nintendo's previous collab project. Fire Emblem Warriors' story is pretty forced, though it's sort of expected with the game that's more meant to be a crossover between different games. The story starts off in the Aetolus Kingdom, where the two main protagonists, Liana and Rowan, live. These twin prince and princess are one day stunned as a giant dark portal opens over their kingdom, unleashing the invasion of monsters that come from between dimensions. As the kingdom falls into turmoil, heroes from other Fire Emblem games come to the rescue, ranging from games like Fire Emblem Awakening, Fates, Echoes, Blazing Blade, and Shadow Dragon. However, the main cast of characters tends to focus on the recently popular 3DS Fire Emblem games. While it's great to see the cast of different Fire Emblem games interact, it does feel heavily forced and it tends to ignore the relationships and the events from the previous games, making this title stand out outside of the canon lore. For a series so well known for its in-depth characters and stories, it's kind of a letdown. Another letdown is the motivation and objectives of the story. Traditionally, the game will have you look for heroes to aid you on your battle as you try to complete the Shield of Flames, the only item capable of stopping these shadowy monsters. As you find these heroes from other worlds, you'll fall into some misunderstandings and eventually convince them to join you, then rinse and repeat. It's not until the later parts of the 12-hour campaign that you actually get a face for the main villain, but for 80% of the game, there is definitely a lack of motivation. It feels like I'm finding plot holes within someone's Fire Emblem Universe crossover fanfiction, but like a Fire Emblem Universe crossover fanfiction, the story isn't so much the main focus, but rather just there to have some sort of excuse for these characters to interact. If you played Hyrule Warriors before, you'll definitely feel like the combat is familiar, though some new mechanics have been added from the Fire Emblem universe. It all starts off when you literally start a new save. You're able to choose between 3 types of difficulties: easy, normal, and hard. Back from the 3DS line of Fire Emblem games is the choice between casual and classic. In casual mode, fallen allies will come back after you complete the chapter, but in classic mode, the famous permadeath system is implemented instead. You can also choose between a slow and steady experience that gives you a bit of context for just about every single feature in the game, including mission briefs, or you can choose the quick and efficient mode that skips a lot of this and ends up keeping the gameplay more action focused. Before jumping into one of the about 20 chapters in this game, you'll be able to customize and modify your cast of characters in the Convoy and Cap modes. In Convoy, you're able to get a view of the available characters that you can play along with their battle stats. Here you can switch out a character's weapon, their costume, and give them items to use in battle, like potions. Varying on your character's stats, certain levels of weapons may not be equipable yet, but that brings us over to the camp mode. You can think of this as the skill tree for your characters. You can go to the crest market and unlock new attack, defense, and skill crests for a character using the materials you found on missions. Varying on the type of crest you unlock, this can alter your character's ability to wield a higher level weapon, use new light and heavy attack combos, or withstand a heavy hit that'll leave you with 1 HP. The layout of this system is the same as a traditional skill tree, and it's really simple to navigate. The only complicated part is that you have to manage this system for about 20 possible playable characters. Now, of course, you can focus on just building up the characters you primarily want to play as, but certain missions require you to only use a certain character, and if you want that parity of levels between characters, it can be quite challenging to manage all of them. The training ground section sort of helps you out though. It lets you spend gold on leveling up your character. It's a quick way to get an equilibrium within the character stats, though spending gold isn't as fun as just grinding and battling with the character, of course. On top of the skill tree, you can modify weapons with skills to further increase their power and practicality in battle. Jumping into a chapter or a mission, you'll get a mini conversation that sort of acts like a mission brief. It's clever in hiding that this is actually a loading screen. Usually I'd listen to the conversation play out the first time I ran a mission, so I hardly ever noticed the loading time. After the mission loads up, you're presented with a very Fire Emblem-like grid view of the map. Here you can choose to move your characters to a specific location on the map prior to starting the mission, and this map view ends up playing a pretty big part in the gameplay later on. Controls are relatively simple. You move around with the analog stick and have both a light and heavy attack that can be used in collaboration to create combos. Usually you'll do a series of light attacks that end with a heavy attack, and this adds a flashy finisher at the end of the combo. At the top left of the screen, you'll see your party characters along with their health, warrior special, and awakening meter. The health is pretty self-explanatory, but you can think of both your special and awakening meter as bonus attacks. The special meter underneath your health is your special attack, and each character has their own unique one that ends up doing a good amount of damage for a wide range of combat. It's pretty useful for boss fights or taking over a fort. The Awakening meter lets you activate Awakening mode. In this mode, the triangle weaknesses are nullified and you get sort of a buff to fight enemies. As the meter runs out, you'll be able to perform a heavy finishing move to take down a handful of big enemies. It's pretty much its own unique type of special attack. Now, since I mentioned the weapon triangle, let's talk about it because it's a pretty big part of the Fire Emblem series and it's something that adds some tactical strategy for the Warriors game. Each character has a class and a type of weapon they hold, may it be a staff, sword, or an axe, just to name a few. This plays a pretty big part in the combat for Warriors, specifically for the boss fights. Traditionally during a mission in Warriors, you'll take over forts fighting hundreds of grunts and fort captains, but every mission tends to have some sort of big boss fight against a memorable Fire Emblem character. In these instances, the triangle plays a pretty big role as these aren't weak grunts anymore, they're stronger and with the right weapon matchup, they can pretty much kill you instantly. You'll either have to wisely use your Awakening mode to nullify the weaknesses or send in the right character with the right weapon. More strategy comes in the form of the map system I mentioned earlier. During combat, you can press the start button to pull up the map, and from here you can give orders to your troops to go after a specific enemy, invade a fort, or team up with a fellow ally. In total, you have 8 main characters on your team, but only 4 of them are actually playable and you can switch between them with the press of the D-pad. The other 4 remaining characters act as guards or allies that can still fight and get orders from you via the map system. Orders are very useful for capturing forts or guarding objectives, and although the AI isn't as efficient as a human controlling them, they're still pretty useful. I mentioned teaming up a bit ago, and that's another useful mechanic in the combat. Allies can choose to team up with each other during a mission, and that adds a bit more tools to your arsenal. You can have your teammate perform an attack during combat, almost like an assist in a fighting game, as well as perform a dual special move so long as both of your characters have their special meter filled up. Different pairs of characters have their own support levels too, that only evolve as you play with them more as a pair. Certain combinations have their own conversation scene too when you max out their support level, though it's a pretty rare occurrence since not too many pairings get one. The new level of strategy adds some variation to the gameplay, but it doesn't completely fix the repetitive feeling that the Warrior games are known for. Every chapter is for the most part very familiar. Start a mission, find a new Fire Emblem character that thinks you're bad. More often than not, it's because they think you kidnapped their friend or their sibling, which is weird because the sibling or friend is on your team, telling them you didn't kidnap them. Like I said before, this game isn't so great with the story. Anyway, you take over forts on the map, defeat the boss of the chapter, and then the game is over. That's purposely boiling it down though, of course. You get some slight variations with map terrains. Sometimes the map will be missing a bridge so only airborne allies can cross over it, unless you activate a dragon vein that pulls up a bridge. Other times the obstacle will be lava that will hurt you unless you fly over it, or turn on another dragon vein that gets rid of the lava. So yeah, the game introduces some sort of variation to the maps over time, but eventually it just boils down to turning on the switch to get rid of the obstacle, and that in itself becomes repetitive again. Outside of the story mode is the history mode, and this is sort of a combination of traditional Fire Emblem with Warriors gameplay. You get a view of a 2D grid map system similar to traditional Fire Emblem gameplay, but this time when you activate a fight, it transitions over to Warriors gameplay. You can play on famous well-known maps from previous games in the series as you face off different challenges like defeat a certain amount of enemies within a time frame, or capturing all the forts on the map. It's a pretty good challenge mode. If you played Hyrule Warriors before and didn't like how repetitive the gameplay got, Fire Emblem Warriors does a better job at adding some variety to its combat with its added strategy mechanics and history mode that's more like a challenge mode that I think is better than the adventure mode in Hyrule Warriors. With that said though, it doesn't completely fix the issue of repetitiveness and the improvement is by a rather small margin. Now outside of all the single player content, there is a split screen multiplayer mode in this game in the form of co-op mode for both history and some of the story missions in the campaign. It works, but it definitely starts to call into question the performance capabilities of the Nintendo Switch. The number of enemies on screen certainly drops when you have more than one character, and you start to see more frame rate drops too. So like I said, the multiplayer works, but it certainly starts to strain the Nintendo Switch with frames dropping as low as what looks like 20 frames per second. Surprisingly though, you do get a good set of options with the visuals in this game. You can alternate between a quality and performance mode, something that you'd probably see in a PlayStation 4 Pro game. This lets you choose between playing the game at 1080p 30 or 720p 60. Oddly enough, I went into this game thinking I'd prefer the frame rate priority with this being a fast action paced game, but I actually found myself playing more in 1080p 30, especially since I had to play this in dock mode for this review. In 720p, everything looks jaggier, though smoother, while in 1080p mode it looks sharper at the cost of a lower frame rate. Luckily, you have the choice of choosing which mode you prefer. When playing in handheld mode, you're pretty much stuck at playing at 720p because of the Switch's display, and though there are some jaggies, it looks better on a smaller display than when you're playing on a larger TV. Things like the UI and the gameplay scale well down to the Switch's display size. Much like other Warriors gameplay, with the heavy enemy count comes some weird pop-in issues where enemies will sometimes disappear and reappear during a cutscene. It's pretty much a staple for the franchise at this point, and it continues to be one in this entry. With that said, the presentation for a Warriors game is pretty good with this entry. Special attack animations look pretty badass in this entry, and the number of enemies on screen is always a decent amount. The music and audio design in this game is surprisingly mixed. Music is fantastic in this game, a lot of which comes from many previous Fire Emblem games that this title branches off of. Music got me pumped for fights and it felt pretty well matched up with the action going on screen. Sound effects and dialogue are questionable though. There's just so much repetition going on with the dialogue in this game when performing a special attack or upgrading a crest for a character. It really started to get annoying. I wish there was a bit more variety in these dialogue sections because the rest of the dialogue pieces and conversations are really good. Whether you hate or love the English voice acting, you have the option of choosing to play in English or Japanese dialogue, and the conversations for the most part are fully voiced. I just wish that the game devs added a bit more variety to the dialogue used in the menu system, and for special attacks, since I can only hear Lucina talk about her father so many times during a special attack before I want to mute the TV. Fire Emblem Warriors is an improvement from Hyrule Warriors, but only by a small margin. I think the title is fun, but much like other games in the series, it can get pretty repetitive rather quickly, but this entry does do a better job at trying to differentiate the gameplay from time to time. The presentation and music tracks are great, though I probably wouldn't recommend playing this in split screen mode. Most of the dialogue and voice acting is done well too, though I do wish some sections would change up the lines repeated over and over again. Ultimately, if you enjoyed or somewhat liked Hyrule Warriors, I think you'll like Fire Emblem Warriors. However, if you didn't like Hyrule Warriors and thought that this entry having Fire Emblem characters would change that, it does by a small margin, but because of the combat it brings, not so much the characters or the lore. And in that, I don't think it'll fully convince you to want to play this game if you didn't already like Hyrule Warriors. That does it for my review of Hyrule Warriors for the Nintendo Switch. I only got sent the Switch version, so I don't think I'll be reviewing the 3DS version, but if you do have any questions that I may have missed in this review, feel free to ask me in the comment section down below, or just hit me up on Twitter for a faster response. As always, if you enjoy this type of content, then please consider subscribing, sharing the videos with your friends. It really helps out my channel, and I really appreciate it. For those of you that requested a Xenoblade Chronicles 2 preview in the comments of my Doom preview, I am working on it, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all very much for watching, hope you guys have a great day, and keep on gaming.